So, how has the internet evolved over time?
Well, I mean, kind of depends where you start, but the internet really was just a connection between a few different computers in this country. Setting up a system from like Stanford to Harvard, for example, to MIT, where people could communicate and send pieces of information all the way across that system. And so in this country, the government actually played a role in developing the infrastructure and developing the internet to be much larger. And since those early times where it was just an ARPANET of um, for example, how could the government communicate if there were some kind of crisis, like a nuclear threat? We're talking more in Cold War era. Then it grew from being something that was very specific to just a small group of individuals to be something that's widespread throughout the world. Um, and so, as I think kind of everybody is generally aware, the internet is a set of there is an infrastructure for the internet that spreads throughout countries all across the world. People so many people are able to access the internet on a regular basis, or at least in some form, and it is the digital content that continues to be uploaded to the internet just grows and grows. And so um, we've seen that essentially something called Moore's Law holds true, which is that about every 2 years, in the sense of the internet, about every 2 years, the amount of digital information that is being created is doubling. And that means exponential growth, which means getting very, very big, very, very fast. Is that
Okay.
kind of what your question was getting at?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, does internet accessibility depend a lot on socio-economic status, and how does it affect negatively to disadvantaged classes?
Yeah, that was kind of, I was alluding to that in my earlier point about people accessing the internet, because it's vastly different based on where you live and what kinds of resources you have. And so there's something called the digital divide, which is a phrase to describe those major disparities. Where, so again, I know a little bit more about this country, but internationally, this is the same theme plays out. So in the United States, um, people who live in rural areas are less likely to access the internet. People who are older, are elderly in age, are less likely to access the internet. People of certain racial backgrounds, people of certain education status, people of certain. Do you want me to close the door?
This one.
People of and so all of these different factors that are part of the socioeconomic um, differences in our society also contribute to the level of internet access and the ease of internet access for people in the United States. And the United States has relatively widespread internet access in comparison to some countries. So, for example, um, in the United States, a lot of people, some people do have internet in their homes, whereas in a country like Cuba, people would have, like, there would be certain set spots that they can have internet, and only certain things that they could then access online. Um, and yeah, so we're talking just about internet access, not like what you can see online, right? Yeah.
No.
Varies widely by socioeconomic status, and a question on the table is whether it also will contribute to continued disparities.
Wait. Actually,
What do
if
I
you
mean?
mention a little bit about what you can see on the internet, would be really good.
Yeah, well, so there's a whole kind of social infrastructure of what's happening online. So there's kind of a social exclusion concern where people who don't have access to kind of where everybody is interacting may have, like, not be able to engage with, like, certain, for example, political debates if they're happening in the online space. But really, what I was getting at is that in certain countries there's a lot more censorship. So China in particular has a reputation for strong internet censorship, where citizens in China can't necessarily access websites that show disagreement with Chinese government, um, with the Chinese government. And so, based on, if you were to do a Google search in China related to some topic about government, you would get different results than a Google search in the United States. And so people have access to different information. And the reason that, while this has always kind of been true, right, textbooks are different by different countries, it in the internet space where so much information is so accessible to some people and not to others, there can be disparities there as well.
Is internet accessibility becoming a social injustice?
I mean, that's an
And
opinion question. In my opinion, yes, I think that it is. The internet is so vital to, in terms of the resources available and the opportunities for education and the opportunities for, in so many ways, that I think it's an injustice to have widespread disparities in the access to that internet.
okay.
But that's my opinion.
Do you think that people actually understand how does the internet work?
No, I think people don't. I think it's similar to how people don't really understand how a car runs. Not everybody needs to understand it in order to be able to use it. And so I think most people in this country have no idea how the internet works in the background and have a very poor understanding of how physical pieces in our world connect to this idea of the cloud or the web.
So, due to the lack of understanding the internet, um, what are some risks that people might face about privacy on the internet?
Ah, well, where do you want me to start? Um, I think that people have a false sense of security where it feels okay. It feels okay to share information about themselves, about their friends, about their newborn children, right? And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it seems to feel to many people like, well, it's just either nobody cares. There's so much information out there that why would they care about my personal information? Or it doesn't really matter in the same way that it doesn't really matter if I just tell my friend right next to me. And it feels like I'm just telling my friend even though it's online. And I think what people don't realize, I think there are a lot of things that people don't realize. One is that all of this information is regularly stored. And so anything that has ever been on the internet can easily be accessed again in the future. So I think some people think, for example, a lot of people in your generation are using Snapchat, and they think, well, the picture's only there for 24 hours. And they'll tell me if somebody, downloads it or something. I don't know all of the details personally, but they think, oh, it's only there for 24 hours, whatever. And we don't know what the potential repercussions will be, but I'm curious to see what presidential candidate races, for example, will look like in 30 years when people who are running also have pictures of their underage drinking, half nakedness, whatever, online and accessible to investigative reporters. At the same time, there seems to be kind of an increased feeling of whatever. So maybe that wouldn't be a social issue, maybe that wouldn't be a concern for a candidate for political office, but maybe it could be used for blackmail or for other potential things in the future, and people don't really realize that. I think I got off topic a little bit.
No, that's right. What are some viable solutions to solve the internet inaccessibility?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't have all of those solutions myself, but I think there are some interesting questions out there. So one question is that tension about privacy versus the capitalistic kind of free market. So the government has been talking about allowing internet service providers to sell information about people in this country. And internet service providers, the issue there is that, just to go back to your privacy question for a moment, they have all of the information of what you've ever done and what you ever do, in a way that if you choose to not use Google Chrome, you choose to use Firefox, then you're choosing where your information goes. Most people have a very limited choice. Maybe they have two potential providers. Maybe around here they might have RCN and Comcast, and that's it. And so those choices aren't really there in the same way if you want to access the internet. And so the reason I brought this up to answer your other question is that the interesting flip side to this argument is that it might be cheaper for individuals to actually pay for internet if they're pay with their information instead of with money. And so there's kind of an open question as to whether that would increase or decrease disparities with internet access, because if I can just sell with my personal information, then I don't have to be able to afford it monetarily. And that's how we currently use, right, the cost of free is how we currently use things like Facebook and Snapchat and whatever, that people don't pay for the thing with money, they pay for it with their personal information. So that's one idea. Really, I think there's kind of a lot of different pieces to this. Do we want to have the government provide internet in the way that the government provides water, to make sure that everybody has water that is safe and safe from the smallest kid all the way up? If we were allowed the government to do it, would that limit the ability of us to hide from the government, to disagree with the government? Would we want nonprofits to do it? Would we want somebody to step up and say, I'm going to help, donate money to this organization because we help make internet more affordable in lower socioeconomic status groups?
Please come to the main office, Ms. Foxen.
So ultimately, I think the question about how to address this issue is actually very similar to some of the other debates we have in this society of how do we deal with inequity. And I don't think there's a different piece to it just because it's the internet. It's the same way, how do we deal with education? Do we do it by neighborhood or do we not? How do we deal with a lot of the problems? How do we deal with poverty? What do we say? And so I don't have any potential solution that I'm a big fan of, besides trying to just increase accessibility all around and maintain privacy and security as well.
Okay. Can you tell me some crucial benefits of having access to internet compared to none?
Sure. Access to information about society, about math, science, the world around us, history, literature, right? Access to information and access to the world. There are social benefits where there's a lot of social interactions happening online. And there's a connectivity aspect, so the world is growing a lot closer because we can now understand what's happening elsewhere much better than ever before. And then there's the leverage that we have as internet users to leverage the power of these social groups to get something done, whether that's political activism, whether that's exposing a wrong, whether that's trying to get money for a nonprofit, like whatever it may be. There's more leverage that we have to access people that we otherwise wouldn't see in daily life, and I think that has a lot of benefits right there.
Okay, what is some wait hold on
There are also some disadvantages of those.
So some people neglect to use internet. Do you think of some reason why they choose not to use?
Well, I think that the question is it a choice? If somebody has access to internet, could afford to use it, but chooses not to, I think that's very different than somebody who doesn't really have that same choice. So which were you kind of in the first category of you have, or was it more the second?
First one.
Yeah, so I think in the first one, it could be a lot of things. It could be a concern about personal privacy and security that the reality is what happens online is very much public ultimately. I think it could be a belief about how to engage with the world and around them. I know personally I don't engage with some of the social aspects of the internet because I don't feel that they're as personal. And so I'd rather engage in person or even on the phone. I make a lot of phone calls to friends instead of contacting them via the internet. I think people might want to, so I think it's privacy and feeling of personal security. I think it's preferences. And I think that it just depends what you need. It depends what your role is in society and what's going on. I mean, I think depending on, are you getting an education? Are there certain things you need to do for that education that require the internet? Are you in a certain job? Does that job require the internet? Are you emailing as part of your job? And so I think it just matters what's going on. But I think some people actively choose not to use the internet, whereas other people may not be able to make that same choice. And those are different categories.
What are some laws or regulations on the internet?
So the internet is mainly based on protocols. So those are sets of rules or procedures that are put into place kind of in an open way. And so an individual could choose not to follow a protocol on the internet, but then they wouldn't necessarily be able to interact with others. So for example, in sending messages online, there's kind of a way that needs to happen in the background on the computer, a way that people don't really worry about. In terms of rules and regulations, there's some important laws in place that vary by country. So in the United States, one of the key laws relates to privacy for online for young people that are under the age of 13. And so there's a lot of protections in place about the storing of information and the transferring of information of young people under the age of 13, whereas those older than that don't have those same protections in this country. Europe has a lot more regulations around privacy and what is allowed for companies to do online versus the United States, whereas some countries have less. And so there's that piece of it. Another kind of rule or regulation that relates to this topic is net neutrality, which is the idea that all data is treated the same on the internet. And so in the physical infrastructure of the internet, a packet is a packet. When you send information, it is going to get there the same regardless of whether you're rich or poor. It's the president sending an important memo or it's a stupid little meme or whatever. It's going to be treated the same. And that's a benefit in that people, otherwise you might see paying for internet access and then, or internet, for speed or for the ability to use the internet. But at the same time, then if there is something you think is more important, it's not going to have any precedence. So that's another important rule or regulation.
Do you think either the government or the private companies are doing their best to solve this problem, the internet inaccessibility?
I don't think anybody's doing their best, but I think that there are incentives in place for everybody to try, because any system that uses the internet, whether that's a company or a government, does benefit by having people on that device. So at least the incentives are in place in that way, where it doesn't really help them to have people kind of excluded from that space. But I don't think it's a top priority right now in any sense that I've heard of to increase that accessibility. I mean, we have in this country a post office in every zip code, but we don't have anything equivalent for the internet. And perhaps when we talk about where are solutions, perhaps we need to think about where our priorities will be, because like I said, it could be treated like water or like mail, and it's not right now. It's treated as a private enterprise, and I'm not sure which is better.
All right. So do you have any final remarks?
Do you have any other questions?
That's it.
Yeah, I think just if you have any other questions, feel free to ask me. I know I rambled a little bit, and if you, just let me know. I'm good.
Cool. Thank you.